This is a guide to selecting attempts for a powerlifting meet, and it's going to be based on clear-cut percentages rather than guesswork or feelings, which is good because it means that we can have a repeatable process, which whether you're a first-time competitor about to do a meet or you're a powerlifting coach who coaches a bunch of athletes, either way, we want this repeatable process because it guarantees we'll get consistent, predictable, good results on meet day. These are the same percentages that I use with my athletes. My name is Michael Elrod-Erickson. I'm the assistant coach for Team USA in the IPL, and I also coach the collegiate powerlifting team at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. So these numbers have not just worked for some of the best powerlifters in the world at the World Championship, but also for some beginners and first-time competitors and everyone in between. In this video, I'm using this attempt planner that I've made. You can get a copy for free with the link below in the description. It's a Google Sheet. You can get access to it and download one. You don't necessarily need one. It's just going to make it a lot easier because it has built-in formulas and calculations to do a lot of the work for you. But you can follow along and do this by hand if you'd rather. These are the percentages. We want the opener to be 87 to 91% of the planned third, the second attempt to be 94 to 96% of the planned third, and then obviously the third is 100% because it's itself. These are the numbers that will be most relevant if you're doing the calculations by hand, but if you're using the sheet, then these ones will be most relevant because the sheet does it in percent increase between attempts. But these are the exact same values. So an increase of 9% is the same as saying that the opener should be 91% of the third. This 13% is the same as 83%. It's just inverted because we're looking at the percent increase. And you don't have to memorize these exact numbers if you're planning to use the attempt tracker sheet because it has color-coded ranges to let you know if you're within these percentages or not, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But the reason that we want to be within these percentage ranges is if your jumps are too small or too big, then both have problems. If your jumps are too small, then you're just essentially wasting energy. Think about it like this. If you were working up to a 1 rep max in the gym, would you take 490 and then 495 and then hit 500? Probably not, because you're just getting fatigued and decreasing the likelihood that you can actually hit that 500 afterwards. You would want to take reasonable sized jumps to save energy and maximize your chance of hitting that big number that you want. Same thing on meet day. The first two attempts are really like a stepping stone on your way to a heavy third attempt. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. They think that they want all three of their attempts to be hard and heavy and cool, and that's just not realistic. We want to start with something that's kind of cold and finish with something that's kind of hot, because otherwise all three of them just end up kind of lukewarm because you're getting yourself fatigued on the first few and then you're not able to hit something that impressive on the third. So that's why we don't want too small jumps. In terms of why we don't want too large jumps is imagine you skipped a warm-up in the gym. When you go to touch that next weight, it's a bit of a shock to your system because you aren't really prepared for that level of load. So it just feels heavy. It doesn't feel grooved. Same thing can happen on the platform if you make too big jumps. And the other thing is, if you do happen to miss an attempt, then that's an even bigger hit to your total. You know, say you made a jump of 20%. Well, now your total just lost 20% when you happen to miss that lift, rather than losing 4 to 6%, because that's the difference between the second and third. So we don't just make tiny increases of 2.5 kilos every time to be really conservative and not take any risk of, oh no, what if we missed? Because we have to balance that with the conserving energy like we talked about earlier. So these ranges are kind of the Goldilocks zone of balancing not being too large or too small. The first step in terms of planning your attempts is to come up with a realistic, reasonable third attempt. That's generally going to be slightly more than you hit in training for a few reasons. First, because in the gym leading up to the meet, we don't need a true 1 rep max. Generally, we're just after something that's fairly heavy and challenging, like a single at RPE 9, so we're leaving just a little bit in the tank that we're actually trying to get on meet day. Also, you should be a little stronger on meet day if you peaked and tapered leading into the meet, because now you're less fatigued. And the meet day environment naturally leads itself to slightly better performance. So, assuming all of those things are going well, you could reasonably expect about 3% more on meet day than you hit for your last heavy lift in training. If those things did not go as well, such as your last heavy lift was the fight of your life, it was really hard and grindy, or it wasn't quite to competition standard and you need to clean some things up, or you're cutting weight for the meet, then you may want to be a little more conservative and you might even scale that down to just trying to match your last heavy lift for this planned third attempt. But for this example, let's say that a lifter hit 490 in the gym and we realistically think that they're good for 500 pounds on meet day. The easiest way to do that, if you're using this attempt tracker here and you're not familiar with the kilogram equivalents to pounds, is just think, well, 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds, so I'm after slightly less than half of the number I want. So I'm after 500. Let's enter 240 and see what that is. That's 530. It's a little more than I really wanted, so let's drop that down. 230 kilos is 507, so I know if I drop to 227.5, there it is. That's right at 500. So the reason I was doing that in increments of 2.5 kilos is because in powerlifting, you have to choose attempts in those increments. You're only allowed to load increments of 2.5 kilos unless it's a record and you're chipping it at that meet, in which case you may be allowed to do increments of 0.5 kilos, but that's a special situation. Generally, it's going to be 2.5 kilos. So this is the planned third attempt that we want here. If you're doing this by hand, the easiest way to do it is based on those percentages like we were talking about earlier. So the opener that we want is somewhere in the range of 87 to 91% of this planned third attempt, and the second attempt should be 94 to 96% of this planned third attempt here. If you're doing that on the sheet will automatically generate those percentages for you over here as you start to enter numbers. So I'll just kind of walk you through how I'd go about this. If you are the lifter or you coach them and know them pretty well, then another good option is think about what they might realistically be able to hit for a triple or what they have hit for a triple in training. That's a classic age-old powerlifting advice, and it tends to be pretty true. So a lifter who hit 500 pounds or is aiming to hit 500 pounds on meet day should probably be able to hit a triple at around 440 in training. So there we go. And then I'm going to look at the difference in these two numbers. It's 27.5 kilos. So let's try 215. And then we can look over here for those percentages that we were discussing. We said that the opener should be 87 to 91%. If we convert that over to what's the percent difference between the first and third, 12%, that's equal to 88% of the third. So perfect. And then the other thing to notice here is the jump from the first to second attempt is slightly larger than the jump from the second to third attempt, and that's exactly what we want. That's because we want to open fairly light and conservative so that it's a number that we're sure that the lifter can hit no matter what kind of day they're having. Even if they're nervous, a little sick, didn't sleep well that night, not performing their best on the day, they're for sure still going to hit that opener so that they're not risking potentially bombing out of the meet and not having a successful attempt. The other benefit of this is we want that jump from the second to third attempt to be slightly smaller because that way the second attempt is slightly heavier and lets us gauge what they might be good for on the day. Strength tends to fluctuate a little bit day to day. So based on how that second attempt looks, we're trying to assess what we think they may be able to hit as their max on that given day for their third attempt so that we can get as close to that line as we can without accidentally loading too much and having them miss their attempt. Speaking of day-to-day fluctuations in strength, as you enter these numbers here, it's naturally going to generate a low side and a high side range for each. These are plus and minus 2% based on the planned center numbers. So say your opener moved really well, it looked really good, and it felt easy, then you may want to go with the high side number here. So you could go with 220 instead of 215, or obviously you could split the difference and go with 217.5. If that didn't move quite as well as you wanted it to, then you could always drop back down to the planned third attempt here. Or say your opener moved really poorly and you're like, oh gosh, that was kind of rough, then you can go with this low side value rather than the planned center value for the second attempt. The only thing to keep in mind is I probably wouldn't go from the low side all the way to the high side because that's a massive increase, right? You'd be going from 210 to 232.5. That's a huge jump. So once you've gone low side, you probably want to stick to low side for the next attempt or back up to center, but I wouldn't go all the way to the high side. But again, these ranges are just here so that you can choose what's appropriate on that given day based on how you're performing. And this gives you a bit of pre-planned flexibility for calling your attempts on the day. And before we get into an example with the bench press, let's cover one other thing real quick. So we're switching over to the rate of increase percentages. This is the percent difference between your first and third attempt. We want that to be somewhere in the range of 9 to 14%. That's why it's green here. Just above and out below that are orange because those are kind of iffy. They're not necessarily inherently bad, but they're potentially a little too large or too big. And then the red is almost certainly uh, not advisable. So that's that for there. If we go back to the attempt planner, you'll notice this percentage here, 12%, is turned green. That's because it falls within that range. Let's for the moment change this number here to 225. You'll notice these turn red because while the difference between the first and third attempt is reasonable, it's still 12%. Now we're making a massive jump to the second attempt, 11%, which is a little too big. And that jump from the second to the third attempt is now 1%, a little too small. So these changed to red to show that those are not recommended size jumps, and the percentage range has been exited. So that's what we were after from the first to the third attempt. From the first to the second, we want to see an increase of about 5 to 8%. From the second to the third, we want to see an increase of about 4 to 6%. All right, now let's do an example with the bench press, but we'll use someone with a lower 1 rep max. So let's say we expect them to hit 52.5 kilos on their third, 50 kilos on the second, and open with 45. This is a perfectly fine, reasonable plan. They're only going 100 pounds, 110, and 115. Those are reasonable jumps, but you'll notice these have turned orange. They're within that iffy sort of range. They're on the slightly large side. That's because with a lower 1 rep max, the increments of 2.5 kilos between jumps is a much larger percentage of that 1 rep max. So it's going to skew these numbers just a little bit. So it's okay to be slightly in that like iffy kind of range with a lower 1 rep max, as long as it's still like a reasonable size jumps. But once you get over about 75 to 100 kilos, you won't have that issue anymore, and you can follow these recommended ranges in the color coding pretty closely. The other thing to notice is with this lower 1 rep max, there's not really a high and low side. That's because the high and low side are 2% more or less than the planned values. And if 2% more or less is not a large enough change to be at least 2.5 kilos, then there's not really anywhere to go. Because again, you have to make jumps of at least 2.5 kilos difference. So honestly, there's not as much room to adjust your plan if you have a lower 1 rep max. Like we could make one change here. We could put 47.5 kilos in here as a planned second if their first attempt did not move as well. But in terms of all these other ones, honestly, we would probably just delete them because we don't really want to go from say 45 all the way up to 52.5 kilos because first off, that's what we're reasonably expecting to hit on the third, so that's probably a bit ambitious and heavy for the second attempt. But also that would be a massive jump to go from 45 to 52.5 percentage of the kind of numbers that we're hitting. So realistically, you may not even have high and low sides if you're working with a much smaller 1 rep max like this. And then let's do another example with the deadlift here real quick. With the deadlift, what I want to highlight is what if you don't actually know what someone might hit for 1 rep. Let's say they peaked for this meet using triples, maybe because they weren't taking this meet quite as seriously. They have another meet just a couple months after, so they want to kind of just train going up into it and not super seriously peak for it. So let's say they hit a triple at 600 pounds. The way that you can calculate an estimated 1 rep max is you do the weight, so in this case 600, times the number of reps, so 3, and then times 0.03, aka like 3% per rep. So that would get you 54, and then you add that value back to the original weight that they lifted, in this case 600, and you have an estimated 1 rep max of 654. So let's say we want 655-ish pounds for this third attempt here. Again, if you have this sheet, the easiest way to do it is just guess slightly less than half of that. So 300 kilos, that's 660. Let's go 295. 297.5. There we go. 655 like we were after. Here you'll notice the high and low sides are a much larger a swing than with these lower values like the one up there. That's because 2% becomes a larger increment. So you could either go 300 or 302.5 based on just how much you wanted to go up from the plan. And then from here, you can, again, do the math and enter your second and third attempt based on this. The second attempt, we want 94 to 96% of this value. The opener, we want 87 to 91%. Or you can just start entering numbers that seem reasonable and then check the color coding and percentages that start popping up over here as you go. So uh, let's say this is probably going to be somewhere in the range of 265. Yep, that's 11. And then this one's going to be right around 282.5 probably. Yep, that's 6% and 5%. So you'll notice for me to enter those numbers took me maybe 30 seconds. So this attempt planner definitely makes it quick and easy to get the numbers in the exact ranges that you want. You don't even have to know the kilo math to pound math very well. You just enter a number. If it's a little higher than you wanted, you adjust it down. If it was a little lower than you wanted, you just kind of add to it until all of this kind of lines up. There's one last set of values for us to calculate, and that's the last warm-up. We want that last warm-up to be an appropriate size jump from the opener, just like the jump size between our attempts on the platform. If it gets too big, then we're not really well prepared for the opener, but if it's too small, then we're kind of wasting energy. So what I generally recommend is you look here at the size difference between your first and second attempt. On the deadlifts here, in that case, it's about 40 pounds. So we want that last warm-up to be about 40 pounds less than we're planning on taking for the opener. If it's over 200 kilos, sometimes I like to subtract 2.5 kilos or 5 kilos just to save a little bit of energy, and I actually have that built into the suggested last warm-up here. If it's more than 200, then it's going to subtract 2.5 kilos extra just to save some energy. So in this case, that last warm-up would be 540 before going into 585. And again, that jump size is pretty comparable to what you're going to be going from 585 to 622 here on the second. So that's the suggested last warm-up. If you want to plan the rest of your warm-ups, I would encourage that. You can use this little box right here and type them in. I would say that you want about 4 to 6 warm-ups in total. Any more than that, and you're probably just going to run out of time, because you have to remember there's a limited amount of time for you to warm up, but there's also a limited amount of equipment, and you're competing with everyone else to use it. So 4 to 6 tends to be that sweet spot of enough that you feel prepared, but not so many that you're having to rush through it or not managing to get all your warm-ups in. And then those other ones besides the last warm-up, the exact numbers don't matter as much because they're lighter, so they're not going to be as fatiguing. So I would just evenly disperse them, building up to this suggested last warm-up. So that's it as far as planning your meet. But this sheet has some built-in features that can be useful during the meet as well. If you want to take advantage of those, we'll run through them real quick. So first off, you need to make sure that you enter your body weight, preferably the official weigh-in from the meet, so that it's most accurate. So we'll put 94.3 kilos. It has to be in kilograms, keep that in mind. and then you select your sex. So here we're going to put male. Both of these are required if you wanted to be able to do the dots calculations. The name and session/flight info, that one's optional. It's just useful if you are a coach and you have multiple athletes at this meet. If that's the case, fill these in, and then you want to come down here to the tab at the bottom. You click the little arrow next to that, and then you click duplicate, and that'll let you make multiple copies of the sheet so that you can have multiple attempt planners for all your different athletes. Then just change the name of the tab to the athlete name, and it's super easy to keep track of all of them. Anyways, so once you've got the body weight and the sex, if you scroll down here to the bottom, it's got a couple different calculations of projections. So it projects your total if you were to go 9 for 9 on the low side, the planned side, and the high side, as well as the resulting dot score based on those totals with your sex and your body weight. Additionally, there's this possibility tree. It lets you see what you might total based on those planned center values, depending on how many of your attempts you got. So say you're going into your deadlifts and you know that you got 2 of your squats, all 3 of your benches. Here's the 3 possible outcome totals depending on how many of your deadlifts you got. If you got 1 deadlift, it would be this. If you got 2 deadlifts, it would be that. If you got all 3 of your deadlifts, it would be this. So this can just be a useful reference tool if you're trying to figure out your odds of getting a certain total or a certain dot score or something like that. These are just projections though. If you want your actual values of what is your current total, what is your current dot score, those sorts of things, then you have to use these features that are built into the sheet. There's little check boxes here next to each of the attempts to show which one you took. So say I went with this opener and it moved really well and it was a good lift. I marked good lift. Now I went with my high side for the second attempt because it was really good. I marked that, and then I marked good lift. Say it felt pretty good, but not the best, so I went with my planned kind of value for the third. I put the checkbox next to that, and unfortunately I missed that one, so I put no lift. This will automatically populate your best good deadlift based on these different options. See, keep an eye on this as I change this to good lift. That's going to increase. And then if I switch this checkbox from this one to that one, it automatically changes. So if you use these features, it's going to pick out your best lifts on each of the 3. It's also going to automatically add up your total, and it's going to automatically calculate your actual dot score. So these numbers over here, the best attempts and the achieved total and dot score, those are numbers that you've actually hit. The ones over here that we talked about earlier were just projections based on your body weight, your sex, and the planned numbers that you had. So these are going to show up before the meet. These other ones only show up during the meet as you use those check boxes in good and no lift. So those are all the features that are built in, but since this is a Google Sheet, you also have lots of flexibility if there's anything that you wanted to add or change. So for example, one thing that I do frequently is say 290 is the current deadlift state record. Then I would highlight the cells underneath this. I would put SR for state record, NR for national, WR for world, and then I'll also make a note of what the current record is so I know what we're trying to beat. And since even this low side value is higher than the record, I would go ahead and highlight that and the high side too, just to make sure that I don't accidentally miss that it's a record, because when you're setting a record at a meet, you need to let the scores table know ahead of time. That way they can put it into their system to get counted as the current record, and they'll get your gear checked after the lift. So that's one good thing that you can add on here, but you can also use this section in the bottom right side of the sheet. Down here in the corner, there's a section for goals, past meet PRs, numbers hit in training, injuries, aches, and pains, any information that might be relevant if this is an athlete that you're coaching to make note of over here, or there's plenty of blank space. You can write down whatever you want. And I did actually make one mistake earlier on in the video that I wanted to stop and point out and fix. I deleted the high side values because they were the same as the center ones. That was silly. I shouldn't have done that because now I realized that actually causes problems down here with the projected values. You'll notice the projected high side total is actually less than the planned center one. That's because this adds up stuff from this right side column, and I accidentally deleted it, so now it's adding 0 for here. So uh, try not to delete the high side values, even if you just plug in the same number as the center number right there instead. So if you want to use this attempt planner tool, you can click the link in the description below, and it's going to open the Google Sheet, and it'll look just like this. Yours is going to be on view only, meaning that you can't make changes. That's because this is a public document, and I don't want someone like messing it up where other people can't use it anymore. So if you want to use it, what you're going to need to do is click File, and then make a copy, and save a copy of it to your Google Drive. And then from there, your copy, you're going to be able to make whatever changes you want on it. So once you've done that, it's going to pop up with this welcome page. It has a little bit of information, but you click over to the Attempt Planner tab, and there's a blank copy that you can use to plan your meet. I hope you found this helpful. If you're interested in any of my other free resources or want information about my coaching services, you can visit liftpremier.com.